the administrator to take the roll. Prue?
Prue, you're on mute.
I was wondering why no one was answering me.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. I'll try that again. Okay. Chair Caffarelli.
I am here. Thank you.
Vice Chair Chris Brogan.
Present.
Pamela Iacono.
Here.
Jay Gross.
I'm here.
Don Matola.
Here.
Don Nguyen.
Present.
And I believe that's it. I knew that Marlene wasn't going to be here tonight, so.
Yep, Marlene is she's not able to attend tonight. All right, then I'm going to go to the pledge. So I pledge allegiance to the flag.
The flag of the United States
of America.
America and to
and
the republic
for which it stands.
for which it stands, one nation,
Under God,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty,
liberty
and
and justice for all.
for all.
Thank you. And on to agenda item number 3, approval of the January 13th minutes from our last meeting. Does anyone have any comments about those minutes? Pam?
Thank you. I know we made mention of getting rid of the Board of Selectmen. Does anybody recollect that conversation? I should have looked it up and played back the videotape to see what exactly we said, but I think we should probably have a line in there that just makes mention of that. Other than that, I didn't see any issues.
I tend to recall that there was discussion about, whether in the context of the budgeting process of the usefulness of that aspect of it. So I agree. But do any other commission members have comments? Or Attorney Mendick looks like he had something to say.
I was going to point out that I think Commissioner Iacono is right. If you take a look at my markup of the budget document, I make a reference to the fact that there had been some discussion regarding the Board of Selectmen, but it was not in the minutes.
Okay, so if there's no objection, I would ask that also be included in the minutes. An amendment can be made to those. Is there any objection by a commission member to that addition? Okay, so can I get a motion to approve the minutes as amended from the January 13th meeting? John Nguyen moved it. Is there a second? That'd be John Matola seconding it. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? It passes. And then we are moving right into, before we do that, does any commission member have anything that they need to be heard on? Okay. And now we're going to move on to the substantial part of our meeting, the agenda item number 4, the town governance issue. And with, if it's okay with you, Attorney Mendick, I'd like to turn it over to you to do the introductions and kind of outline our evening's panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My pleasure. As a background document, number 3, I provided you'll see the names of all the speakers that we have this evening, but I also provided the background document to give you a little context. You remember at the beginning of this process, I said there are only 2 required provisions of any charter. One is to have a legislative body, and on this document, you'll see the alternatives for legislative bodies and a chief executive officer in the right-hand column, and you'll see what the alternatives are for chief administrative or chief executive officers. On the second page, there's a typo, on elected officials, I wanted to give you a feel for how Fairfield stacks up against other communities of relative size or other RTM communities in terms of the number of elected officials that you have under your charter compared to other communities of equal size. And the last page, the last few pages of the document is basically a document that shows you by population forms of government in Connecticut. So you can get on your own, in your leisure, you can get a sense of the range of powers, range of municipal governments that are out there. And that'll probably be a useful guidepost if you want to do some further research or review to see how other communities are organized in the state of Connecticut. This is the first of two panels. In 2 weeks, we're going to have a panel that will include elected officials and other officials from various communities throughout the state to talk about their experience in the different forms of government. But today we're going to start off with two different programs. We're going to start off with a program, kind of a keynote on the forms of government by Joe DeLong from CCM. And in a few moments after Joe is complete, Joe will be happy to answer any of your questions. We have two outstanding professors, Gail Alberta from Fairfield University and Gary Rose from Sacred Heart, who will talk to us about the same issue. They'll elaborate a little bit more and approach it from the point of view of their studies and research over the years. So we're going to start with Joe. And by way of introduction, Joe is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, which is the state's largest nonpartisan organization of municipal leaders that represents cities and towns of all sizes throughout the state of Connecticut. I believe they have 168 member municipalities, which means they're down one from the 169 municipalities in the state. Joe was a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates, so when you hear his accent, you'll know it's not Southern Connecticut. Representing the 1st District from 2000 to 2008. He was the majority leader of the House of Delegates for 2 years, and he served as Executive Director of the Regional Jail and Corrections Facility Authority, which is a pretty impressive operation, a $100 million public-private corporation in the state of West Virginia. And then he entered the private sector for a few years before he came to CCM, I believe in April of 2015. For those of you who enjoy college football, Joe was a standout athlete at the West Virginia University football team in the year when the Mountaineers had an undefeated season back in 1993. I guess that's one of the reasons no one wants to mess with Joe in the corridors of power in the General Assembly in Hartford. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce my dear friend, Joe DeLong.
Steve, thank you so much for that introduction. And I want to thank all of you for having me here tonight. One of the things Steve mentioned about my years of playing football, if you don't believe that, all you have to do is come by my house and see me in the morning when I get out of bed. And you'll very quickly understand that I was once an athlete and now I am a broken down old man. And let me just say this before I get started too. I'm really pleased that as you go through this process, I'm not just saying this as a cursory point to make, I really mean it. Steve Mednick is by far, hands down, the charter revision expert, legal expert in the state of Connecticut. We work with a lot of good counsels who do a lot of good work in our communities in many areas of the law, but there is no one in this state that you could have found that even comes close to having the expertise that Steve does in doing charter revision. So from my perspective, you're in great hands there, and know that you're blessed that you hired the right person. One of the things I was thinking about doing that, I don't want to talk very long, but a couple people on here know me, most of you probably don't, but one of the things that I like to do, for better or for worse, is sometimes a little storytelling into what I'm talking about. If nothing else, to lighten the mood, maybe make it more entertaining and cover up the fact that in many cases I don't know what I'm talking about otherwise. So if I tell a story, maybe people will still be at least entertained. But it was really 7 years ago. I don't want to say to the day because I don't remember the day, but it had to be very close to 7 years ago to the day that a recruiter, a national recruiting firm, called me out of the blue I picked up the phone and the recruiter was asking me if I was looking to leave the Jail and Correctional Facility Authority. And I told them that I wasn't necessarily looking, but I was always willing to listen. And they told me about this national search that they were doing for the next executive director of CCM. And, you know, very quickly, they talked me into at least coming up for an interview. And the one thing I want to share with you, which is interesting, is as a professional, you usually like to go into an interview completely prepared. I had no idea. This happened so fast. I had no idea whether this was something I was even interested in. I was just intrigued. And I was so busy at my other job. I did no preparation at all. Sad to say that, but I really didn't. I didn't pull up the website. I didn't study who the people were on the board. I didn't look at what issues the organization was involved in. Although as a former majority leader, I was certainly familiar with the work of municipal leagues. And so I show up for the interview, and I expected a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. And I was in the interview for close to 2 hours. And that's when you get the first sign that maybe things are going pretty good. Either that or you're the only applicant that they have, you're not sure. But in the course of the 2 hour interview, which I really enjoyed, I enjoyed the dialogue. I enjoyed getting to tell these folks about me and hear about the organization and its challenges and the opportunities. But at the end, the very end of the interview, as interviews typically go, the person who was chairing the interview said, "Do you have any questions for us?" Now, normally, I would go into an interview even prepared for those types of questions. I mean, a good interview prep says you should have questions, and those questions should be something that the interviewers understand that you're really paying attention and focused on the job. But I only had one question at the time, and it tells you a little something about how interesting this is 7 years later that I'm doing this presentation. I looked at the committee who had all introduced themselves at the beginning of the interview, and I said, "I have one question. What the heck is a first selectman?" And some of them, I think, shuddered at the question, and others laughed, and they quickly explained to me what a first selectman was. And when I went out of the room, the recruiter grabbed me and he says, "Man, thanks for making me look bad. I tell them how great you are, and you come in and you don't even know what their title means." And I said, "Well, I've never heard of the term first selectman in my life." And the reason why, it's very unique to the Northeast. You know, and so I think that's one of the things that I want to talk about real quickly and go through briefly as this keynote is the unique nature of what you're going through, what you're studying, what your charge is, and why you even have that charge to begin with, how a charter is even formed or allowed to be done in the state of Connecticut. And so a lot of that goes back to, I believe it was around 18. Let me back up before I even go to that. So obviously, most of you probably know states' rights come from the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution defines in it what the rights of states are. There is no mention of local government, county government, municipal government. There's no guidance in the U.S. Constitution how that's handled. That is all 100% left up to the states. That's a function of the states. And so back in 1868, there was this judge, Judge Dillon, who created what's known as the Dillon's Rule now, that essentially clarifies the fact, as county governments were, or so are municipalities, that they were 100% entities of the state. They were not standalone forms of government. They did not have their own autonomy, that local governments had the power and authority only to do what states told them that they were allowed to do. Now, what I'm going to share with you is, in many cases, and we're going to talk about a home rule and morph into that, but in many cases, while Connecticut is a home rule state, and we'll talk about how we got there, Connecticut is an incredibly narrowly limited home rule state. Most of the state of Connecticut still, frankly, at the local level operates under Dillon's Rule. And the reason why I say that in a home rule, a complete wide open home rule state, a municipal government is granted the authority by the state to do anything that it deems appropriate, unless it is expressly prohibited in state law. In Connecticut, local governments, well, narrowly fitting and having a home rule statute now in the state constitution, it's very narrow. Connecticut municipal governments can't do anything unless it is expressly permitted by state law. So in many cases, you're kind of in that quasi, yes, you're home rule, you have a home rule statute, but you really are following Dillon's rules across the board in most cases. What does the limited home rule mean, and why is it in the Constitution? Essentially, in a nutshell, Connecticut's limited home rule provision is a home rule provision that allows for what this committee is doing. It allows for the establishment of a charter to guide on some levels the way that you are going to self-govern within your community. Still with a ton of restrictions, but at least your structure for self-governance is really the whole point of Connecticut's home rule statute. And what the statute says is you can do a charter, you can set up your own charter, you can do it your way, which is best for your community, that sets up your legislative body and your governance structure. Or if you don't do one, then you divert back to a town meeting form of government automatically. So what I want to talk about and just kind of give a quick overview on are these forms of government and what essentially each one of them falls into, and what an interesting outlier that the state of Connecticut is. So for many years, many decades, the most popular form of local government across the country was a mayor-council form of government, where the legislative body is the elected city council, or say, like in the case of New Haven, they call it a board of alders, whatever the case may be, that you had really two structures of mayor council boards of government, where the council is the legislative body, because that's the whole key to all of this. Is no matter what form of government you have to have a legislative body. So in the council mayor form of government, you really have two forms. You have the strong mayor form or the weak mayor form. And the primary difference between the strong mayor form and the weak mayor form, well, there is some other minutia, is essentially who the departments report to. In a strong mayor form of government, all the department heads report up to the mayor. In a weak mayor form of government, the department heads report to the city council. There's also the whole strong mayor, weak mayor, of whether the mayor has a vote on the council or whether the mayor doesn't have a vote on the council. That plays into it as well. But the big primary difference in that form of government is who the department heads report to, who has that control, or essentially who is the CEO of the town. That's the big difference. And again, that's what the majority of municipalities across this country, that's how they were structured for many years, up until about 20 or 30 years ago. Now, the mayor council form of government makes up, I looked at it earlier, it's roughly about 33% of local governments across the country are still a mayor council form of government. That 33% is heavily comprised of larger urban communities. Almost all of your large metropolitan areas, your New Yorks, your Bostons, your Chicagos, all of those types of places are still fall under the mayor council form of government. And then, obviously it does trickle down into some smaller communities as well. But what happened, back in, and I apologize, I had the dates down. I'm thinking it was around 1968 or so, was when you started to see this transition. And the transition, frankly, if you're a student of history, had more to do with fraud than anything else. There was a lot of transition that was taking place, and it was all built around the Industrial Revolution. So you had this transition taking place over the Industrial Revolution, where the state legislatures were getting inundated with local issues that had to do with zoning, issues that had to do with public safety, things that the General Assembly really did not have the time or expertise to deal with. So that's when they started creating some more of these home rule statutes and delegating more authorities to local governments to self-govern in broader areas. But during that same period, you had some of these fraud issues that were going on, where whether it was within county commissions, which ultimately the fraud issues, many states dealt with them in one way. The state of Connecticut dealt with them by eliminating counties. But you also had these issues of nepotism, people who were doing a lot of political favors for whoever, was funding their campaigns, the variety of things that taint government with a black eye. It was at that same time that you saw this movement where people were getting away from the mayor council form of government and shifting over to the council town manager form of government, where now the mayor or the council were no longer acting as the CEO of the town, but it was an elected professional, an appointed but professional credentialed town manager who was granted authority that was traditionally authority of the mayor to run the departments, to run the town. And those people had to have a degree. They were, had certifications, their certifications through ICMA and other organizations that made this desire to make sure that it was a trained professional that was actually doing these things. And today, across the country now, it has shifted that is now the council manager form of government is now the most prominent form of government in the United States. And currently, roughly 60% or just a little over 59% of municipalities across this country use a council manager form of government. Now we get down to the last 6% nationally, which is really interesting. It's only 6% nationally because it pretty much only exists in New England, which raised the question that I had when I came here and interviewed and asked, what's a first selectman? And that was the town meeting form of government, which is not used anywhere else other than the New England states. So talking a little bit and understanding the origin of the town meeting form of government, why is it so prevalent here and where did it come from? Where it came from was back in the early settlers' times when people were coming here, where we hadn't had the Revolutionary War yet, but they were breaking off from Britain, from the British government, from the English monarchy. And what ended up happening was the people who settled here were developing these different areas or communities. This is through Massachusetts and, of course, Connecticut as well. We're developing these little communities based off of their religious sects. So I lived in a community based off of my church. And what these folks who were breaking away from the monarchy really, the monarchy had all, in their eyes, had all this, corruption and again, all this control and all this power. And they wanted the power to rest with the people, and they never wanted to see government become strong and powerful again. A strong, powerful government was the enemy in their minds. So these church sects essentially created this town meeting, community form of government where everybody who was a member of the community was an elector and had a vote. Something that still sticks around in many of our communities today. In fact, it became so prevalent. What a lot of people don't know is the king became so concerned that he actually outlawed it. But when he would outlaw it, I can't remember if he outlawed it as a town structure, and so they went to a county structure to still do it, or vice versa. But that was the really unique thing about how these governments worked. And so many of those continued to stay in place. The interesting challenge is, well, you talk about the challenges of fraud and things that happen with a centralized power structure, with having a mayor who's the CEO or has complete control, or a smaller centralized council that has all that power in, or the CEOs, or even the town manager. The one thing that these people, the things that these people feared, they wanted this more decentralized government. The difference is well, you have that challenge on the one side. On the other side, that form of government relied almost exclusively on universal participation of the electorate, of the citizenry. And one of the challenges that has happened with that structure as we've evolved is you now have issues that are much more complex than a lot of lay people have the time. Frankly, at times, it's not that they can't understand them, it's the time to dedicate to understanding them, to be able to come to a town meeting and to really be educated and know why certain decisions or recommendations are made. So that was one significant challenge. And then the other challenge is we don't have that level in many cases of community engagement anymore. So what you'll see a lot of times on a town meeting is it's who gets out the vote. and that can be very narrow. I've seen major purchases done across communities in this state where 4 people showed up and voted and did the expenditure in town meeting forms of government. So that's the danger and the challenge. And so as that challenge became more prominent, you started to see what I think maybe Fairfield has a form of, and I apologize, I don't know all the inner workings of how you currently work. I know it's, what Greenwich does and all. You started to see the hybrid where they created the representative town meeting, where it was the same concept of having a town meeting, but instead of having everybody in the community could come and make a decision, you had each of these communities, these little, it could be a little area, segment, street, whatever, who elected somebody to represent their area or their region to go to the representative town meeting. So still very decentralized, but still having a little more structure than just the complete open town meeting. And at least what I've seen in Connecticut, these RTMs have worked out much better simply because they do participate. They seem to, even in Greenwich where their RTM is well over 200 people, when they have a vote or a meeting or a discussion, it's almost exclusively the overwhelming majority, if not 100% of those people show up and participate. So it's a new way, essentially a hybrid way of doing the town meeting form of government, but still getting some narrowing down of that expertise of the people who are making the decision making. And it was funny. I have obviously a little bias, but perhaps my bias is because I'm not originally from Connecticut. But I was always willing to share my biases. My biases are always, I like people who are responsible for digging into the minutia and then reporting back to the voters. But I believe in a level of representative town government because I think that you get professionals or people who are fully dedicated to making these decisions. And I was having an argument with or discussion, really wasn't an argument, with a friend of mine who was very passionate about keeping that decentralized, completely town meeting form of government. And they were pleading their case. And I said, look, I understand. And I think it's an appropriate argument for every community to have. I said, just from my perspective, if I have a medical issue, I would prefer to go see my doctor, or perhaps get a second opinion and see 2 doctors or 3 doctors and make that decision. I really don't want to call everybody in my family or everybody who lives on my street together to tell me what my medical treatment should be. I think that they're going to be very well intended, but I'm not so sure that they have the full background understanding or expertise to be making those decisions in the best way, for me going forward. And so that's always been my fear of town meeting forms of government, that our issues are becoming so complex and our politics are becoming so divisive and special interests are becoming so good at grabbing a segment and pulling a segment into something when everybody else is sitting by the sidelines, that there's an inherent danger in doing that, particularly in a community if the community's not real small. If you have a community that's real small, I think it probably works better, but the larger the community, the more I think you have to have consideration of the value of pulling either town manager expertise in, a professional in, or somebody who is a full-time elected person who's completely dedicated to the work of the town or the community. So that's, I promised Steve I wouldn't go too long because you have some really smart people coming on here after me, but that's my 99-cent version of the breakdown of the 3 different forms of government that I'm sure that you're going to be considering and what makes the most sense for your community. The other thing that I would just offer to you is, well, that was my 99-cent breakdown. There is a presentation that CCM does a lot of times for newly elected officials and others. It's actually done by Matt Knickerbocker, the first selectman out of Bethel. And it's about an hour-long webinar that goes way deeper into all of these opportunities and all of these challenges than what I just did. And the good news is you don't have to sign up for it. There's a copy of it that exists on YouTube that I could get to Steve later and he can share the link with you. But if you would want to hear a really in-depth drill down, not only into the history, but also into what have been some of the different challenges of taking these different positions, the challenges and frankly the opportunities. That presentation that's done by Matt Knickerbocker is excellent. So I would highly recommend it if you are interested in that, that you would take the time to view that. So, Counselor, I will stop now if that's okay and entertain any questions. And hopefully I didn't ramble on too long and can keep you on your intended schedule.
I'll defer to the chair to recognize questions. Thank you, Joe. And by the way, Matt Knickerbocker is one of the outstanding public officials in the state of Connecticut. So I look forward to getting that piece from him.
Very much, Joe. It's good to see you, and I appreciate you being here and your comments tonight. I think it's very helpful for us, and I will ask any members of the commission if they do have questions or comments for you. Okay, Chris Berger.
Hi, Mr. DeLong. Thank you very much. I guess you're in kind of a unique position of seeing in the mid-sized towns in Connecticut a little bit of everything. And just what's the difference that you see in how they operate and how effective, whatever that means, they are? I'd be curious to get your view on that.
Yeah, that's a tough question for me to answer, not because I want to duck it, because I don't, but because it's so different. So let me say this aside from the whole the whole town referendum or town meeting form, if we get into the other ways of doing it, if you have, and so much of it depends on the electorate, but if you have strong, talented, dedicated, elected officials and strong mayor type forms of government or heavier council, board of selectmen, first selectmen, strong forms of government there, those can work very well because those elected officials both understand the desire of their community as well as how to meander the politics of things. And that is very important. Where it becomes problematic is if those elected officials are strictly partisans or strictly political, because there is a very highly important administrative function of this job of keeping a community running well. It can be like a company that has a CEO who is an outstanding spokesperson and has an outstanding vision for where he or she wants that company to go. But meanwhile, internally, nobody's running the departments and the company's falling apart underneath of them. I've seen that happen in the private sector. It can happen in the public sector as well. On the other hand, to give you some of the balance, on the council town manager forms of government, I often struggle with town managers being able to get them to understand political realities of what can be accomplished or what can be done, or setting priorities and strategies, because a lot of times they're very good at running their communities and they're very good at analyzing challenges within their communities and setting a course to meet those challenges. But they are, many of them, very politically tone deaf. And so there have been times within my organization where town managers I have great respect for, who have chaired committees on the board, and I've tried to get them to massage a position a little bit or to try to get them to get away from something, and they would say, well, why? That's not right. And I'd say, it's not all right and wrong, as we try to teach our children it is, but in government, it's also what is possible. And, and sometimes what is possible is not the mindset of a town manager, because they don't a lot of times grasp or get in the weeds of understanding the political minutia as well as an elected official does or can. So there's balance there both ways. From my perspective, again, just my opinion, and others will give you different ones and valid ones. From my perspective, the issues that we face as governments, the issues that we face as communities today and how deep and broad and complex those issues are, you need to have some type of a CEO structure of people who can dig into that, have a decision-making process, and explain that decision-making process and validate it with the electorate. Taking all of those decisions to the electorate and making the electorate the legislative body, I feel like, although that's tradition in Connecticut, in many ways, its time has passed because we see it happen all the time. These issues are far too complex. I'll give you an example of a very small community, one that where these things are typically managed better in small communities. There was a budget issue where we were dealing with, in that community that faced it, we were dealing with, or they were dealing with some pretty severe internet hacking type of issues, ransomware, compromise, and the community did not have the budget or the infrastructure, the ability to have a larger full-time IT department. And so after doing a lot of study and a lot of research, the first select person put in their budget that was presented at the town meeting to do this, to use this company that nationally is like nationally renowned at offering at a very reasonable price, at offering these IT services, particularly to small communities, to give them that protection that they otherwise wouldn't be able to have. It really seemed like a no-brainer. It was a few dollars that had the potential to save millions and millions of dollars to that community, not counting a lot of embarrassment. And at that town meeting, the people in the town meeting got hung up on the fact that that company didn't have an office in the state of Connecticut, which they did not. They were a national company, and they were the experts in this field. But all they could grasp was, why didn't we go with a Connecticut company, go out and find us a Connecticut company that could do the same thing? And they rejected it in the budget. And to this day, that community still doesn't have any of those IT protections, because what that town management or town meeting didn't understand was, through the vetting process at that time, there wasn't anybody in the state of Connecticut that offered affordable services that that town needed. So, it became a real gap that they have because of that. So I think those are things that you need to consider. Is what are the jobs of the professionals, and at the same time, how do we keep the people in our community engaged in what's in the decision-making process as much as possible without granting them too much authority that they're not prepared for?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. John Matola has a question. You're still mute. There you go.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I'm just curious about town manager positions, and just based on what you've seen over the years. When a town manager is hired by a community, do they normally move into the community?
Depends on the size of the community. That's defined. That can be defined in your charter, obviously.
Okay.
But yeah, you can require it. A lot of communities do require it, and I think in most cases, frankly, a community the size of Fairfield, it would not be an unreasonable requirement at all. There are some really small communities that's tough. You know what I mean? Sometimes. But that's not an unusual or considered to be an unreasonable requirement to require relocation into the community within some, a certain time frame, usually 60 days, something of that nature.
Okay, and how long does a town manager stay with a community? And I guess my question is, do town managers tend to come and go, and do they go to what they consider to be better paying jobs frequently? I mean, what's from just your observation, how long do they typically stay in a community doing the job?
My observation is that town managers who work in communities that respect them, respect their authority, and don't get overly political, that those town managers a lot of times will stay in those communities the majority of their careers or to retirement. We also see some communities, I won't give the name, but one comes to mind, that's constantly looking for town managers and have massive town manager turnovers because every 2 years their council swings the other direction. And when it swings to extremes. It swings extreme right. I just put up my left hand when I did. I guess with some on camera I can do it like that, but it swings either really extreme right or it swings really extreme left. And when it does, that creates this political push on the town manager. So you'll get, and within its own community, and I'll just be, don't know any of your political affiliations. I'm just giving you the facts and the reality that I've seen in this community. This community, when I came here, had an outstanding town manager who's doing very well in Massachusetts now, by the way, was highly regarded amongst her peers, highly regarded by me as an incredible resource and knowledgeable person, a very hard worker. But as a town manager representing the management side of a town, they had some battles with the labor unions in that community. They were trying to hold the line, do as they were supposed to do, and I think doing a good job playing the role that they were playing. Well, the labor unions essentially ran a slate to replace the people on city council so they could replace that town manager. So new city council came in that was the labor back slate, and the first thing they did was eliminate the town manager, and then a new town manager came in, and with the understanding that I'm here to, work more closely with labor, which he did. And I think, some people saw that as very favorable. Other people saw it as some significant rising cost within the community. And then not too long after that, there was another swing and that town manager was gone. And so you can get that yo-yo if the electorate allows it. And if your city council is changing over, a board of selectmen, whatever the case may be, whatever terminology you use, if it is changing, fairly regularly and it is changing based off of really hard political ideologies on one side or another, then sometimes town managers, get pulled into that. What happens, and what's now happening with that particular community, they're having trouble finding applicants because really good town managers from other places are looking at it and they're saying, I don't want in the middle of this. Or if somebody's looking in their couple years to retirement, they might be interested. Or if they're already retired and ready to come out for a couple years, they might be interested. But for the most part, they're not getting candidates who are looking for longevity because they know that community doesn't offer it. But my experience with some of the best in Connecticut is I've seen some really good ones stay with their communities for 20, 30 years and retire from the communities in which they've worked in all that time.
All right. It almost sounds like I served on a board of education in town several years ago, and we were told if your board of ed doesn't get along well, you're going to have a difficult time getting the superintendent of schools who will want to come to the community. So it sounds similar. And town managers, do they generally report to a town council or city council? And if the answer to that question is yes, does it tend to be a council of under 10, let's say, 9 council members? How does that, in your experience, work?
I think it varies based off of the size of the community, and that's a research question. If you wanted us as an organization, Steve may have it. If he do you have it, Steve? Right. If he doesn't, that's a question I'd be more comfortable going back and having our research department kind of. We could look at that and see we could very quickly across the state get you a report of all of the council, town manager form of governments, what the size of those councils are and what category of populations that their towns fall into. That'd be an easy thing for us to report back to this committee, okay, if you'd like.
Joe, if you don't mind, I'll send you my breakdown. I have a breakdown of every town and the form of government. And so it'd be relatively easy to extrapolate from that how many people are on their council. I think that sure, most of them tend to be relatively small.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're under 20, most of them.
Oh,
Manchester may be one of the larger communities. I'd have to think what they call their council, the board of directors. And I'll bet you there's 10 or 11 on theirs. West Hartford has a relatively good sized one, but I think under 15. But I'll send Joe that list, and if his people can put some numbers in, that would be great.
Yes, be happy to do so.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I just have one more. I'm sorry to monopolize, but one question. So if a community hires a town manager, do they sign a contract, and is there language in these contracts that, 4 or 5 year contract, and that the town manager can only be removed for cause, or is it at the whim of the council, whoever's in charge? How does that work generally?
My understanding is, and again, I could do some research, and I might have some town managers kill me if I answer this question wrong. My understanding is almost all of those positions are at will.
Okay. Thank you.
Pam, it looks like Pam has a question. And Jay after that.
Hi, Pam Iacono. Thank you so much for being here. This was really informative. My question is about talent pool and salary. Where does one go to find a town manager, since it's not a typically normal thing in New England, so to say? Is this a nationwide search, or?
Yes, it can be. Doesn't have to be. I know even, I'm not trying to promote our own services, but even our organization has an executive search function that can help with filling those. Most of them are, RFP type posting. The posting gets put up on the ICMA, which is the National Certifying Association for Town Managers. But it's a typical job posting function. It's not overly complex. It's also not something that I would encourage your community to not spend a fortune on some high dollar outside search firm that's going to charge you all the expenses and 20 or 25% of the salary to fill the position. That's really not necessary. What you're going to find is a national search firm 99 times out of 100 is going to bring you a candidate from Connecticut, Boston, or Rhode Island, or Massachusetts, or Rhode Island anyway. But those aren't, they're not the most, they're not as hard to fill as finance director positions. I don't know if you have any experience with that, Nikki. Finance director positions are becoming very difficult to fill. But qualified town manager positions, there are enough, and they're also, by the way, there are enough really good town managers, if you ended up in that type of a structure, that are retired, that will come into a community on a very short-term contract while you're doing your search as well. There's some good ones out there that you'll get, can get for 3 months or 6 months, for a transitionary period. So if that's something that this committee ultimately decides to explore further, I think we could certainly assist with helping you fill that and giving you the direction to fill that.
No, that's helpful. And what would his salary be to attract top talent?
I'm only guessing here in a community of Fairfield size, but I'm thinking you're talking somewhere between 150 and 200,000 a year.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure. If you'll excuse me one moment, I have some people beating on the door, so I'm just going to hit mute, step right out, and I will turn around and come right back to the next question if there are others.
There is another question.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, thank you. Jay, I believe you had a question? Or?
Yes. Thank you. Jay Gross. Hi, Joe. Thank you for coming and talking to us.
Okay.
Generalizations are always a little bit dangerous, right? But you did mention one, I guess, general benefit of the town manager council model, and you kept coming back to that, and that was the complexity of the issues of our time. I guess I'll just enable it that way. The one example you gave was technology, but general complexity requiring the skills of professionals, right? That's the way I guess I would restate that. Are there any other, and I guess we'll get this also from Dr. Alberta, but would there be any other general benefits that you would say the communities would, point to as a reason why they went to that model, that form of government?
None that directly, I am off mute, right? None that directly come to mind. I mean, I do want to reiterate the point too that in communities with good elected CEOs, there are real benefits to that as well, significant benefits. Part of which is just being out in the community. Town managers are usually, for better or for worse, they're usually a little more tied to their desk. They're usually a little, they're not out there, knocking on doors and hearing from citizens in the community. They're taking a lot of their political direction, from councils and things of that nature, but not holding any political accountability with their job because they are professional administrators. So there is always that part that if you have elected officials who can perform an administrative function really well, they can bring a tremendous benefit. I know even within our organization, we've had town managers who have come in, who have served on our board, who have come into a board and articulated a really good, really important point, and helped form a position on an issue that we've had, and we've gone to do a press conference or something like that and said, you've really brought a lot to the table on this issue. Can you get up at the podium and speak about that? And it's been, I have to get permission on my council first. And then they've shown up, well, they were able to articulate things really well in this private meeting. They've shown up with a written script that they've had approved and weren't allowed to deviate from it. And it's definitely takes something away, from that level of accountability with the public at large and the electorate, as opposed to just the elected council itself. So, there are those generalizations on both sides where things really help. And the best world is probably having an elected CEO who's just really good at both parts of his or her job, at both parts of the politics and understanding and working the politics, while still being a strong administrator. But you can't guarantee that, and if they're not good, well, you can make a change at the next election cycle, but you can't make a change mid-cycle while things are necessarily falling apart. So those are the kind of the checks and balances that you have to find a way to weigh and to meander through, and what's best for your community and what your community's needs are, which obviously all of you on here are going to know that far better than I do, of what your community's individual needs are and which one of these models may make the most sense.
But don't you retain the political sensitivity through the elected town council? I mean, that's where the politics would come into that model, right?
Yeah, I mean, the politics do come in through that model, obviously, and the town. It's an interesting, it's a really interesting model in the fact that the town manager is the CEO of the town, but at the same time, because they can be so guided from the council, what happens at times, if it's not done well with a good council, they can either be a scapegoat for council's decisions, or they can be just the opposite. They can be insulated from bad decision making because they say, well, I was just following the direction of my council. And you say, well, wait a minute, you were brought in to be the professional, to push back about that. So you have to have the right balance. And I guess that's the whole point of doing this is there is no perfect model. You know, there's just the evolutions. I mean, I think that many people in Connecticut probably still believe that the town meeting form of government or a referendum form of government is still the perfect model, the most popular Connecticut model that we've had for years because it's what we've always done and it engages people. But you have to ask the question: are the issues the same as what they were in the early 1900s? And is the community engagement the same as what it was then? So all of these different models have their different drawbacks and different opportunities.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Sorry, that's not a very definitive answer. That's why I'm glad that I'm here talking and you guys are making decisions.
Can I ask really quickly, Joe, that, and not to name the town, but what was the approximate size of the town that had that back and forth and kept going through town managers and couldn't hold on to one? Was it a really small one, or was it more?
No, it was more of a me. I would put it in the same category as a Hampden or a Fairfield.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Thank you. Sure. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I know we do have 2 more speakers. I think we could go on all night with you, Joe, and I appreciate your time. But I'll do one. If anybody has a quick question for Joe, or if you have any final thoughts, Joe, that you wanted to leave us with on the whatever you do, don't any cautionary tales that you want to give us that could be wrapped up quickly of anything to avoid. But
the only quick statement I would make, and you can certainly do it through Steve because he and I talk all the time, if we can be helpful from a research or data perspective as you go through this, not an opinion perspective like I've given, but just a pure research data area. If there's anything you want to know that we can answer and provide to you, don't hesitate to ask. We can turn those things over typically very quickly.
Sounds good. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Steve, who's the counselor who's moderating here. You're still muted a little bit there, or a lot.
I'll drop off as soon as you get Steve back. I just want to make sure he doesn't have anything for me.
There I am. I was having a connection. It looked like a connection issue there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Thanks again.
Everybody.
I'm also very, very pleased. The population, I don't want to reveal the town, was about 30,000. I think I know the town in Connecticut. Thank you to our 2 professors for being here. And I'm going to start and ask both of them to speak for a few minutes and then cover their territory, and then they'll be available for questions. I'm going to start with Professor Gary Rose, who's a professor and chair of the Department of Government at Sacred Heart University. His teaching and research interests include American politics, the American presidency, presidential elections, constitutional law, and state and local government, as well as political parties. He's been at Sacred Heart since 1982, and he's been a commentator for various media regarding national and state politics and Connecticut politics. He's written a number of books. I think he's up to 14, if I'm not mistaken, including most recently the book called New England Local Government, The Case for Connecticut, which I have been reading. And I notice it's empty on the back. I'll be happy to do a little squib for him when I'm finished reading the book. But he's an outstanding professor. He, myself, and Professor Alberta, who you'll meet in a few minutes, had a wonderful conversation, which I was 10 or 15 minutes late for last night, I'm embarrassed to say. But they're both engaging and smart and really have a tremendous handle on the current state of local government and hopefully the future of local government. So it's my honor to introduce Gary Rose, Professor Rose.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
Audio is good. Okay. I had a little trouble getting on to start with, and I see Gail there. Gail, thank you for helping me through this process here. But yeah, it's a real pleasure, and I'm really glad that Steve has invited me to join, your meeting tonight. And it's great to see Gail too. I've been on some panels with Gail before, and I know that she is certainly a highly respected political science professor over at Fairfield U. So, but it really is great to talk about local government and drop into the towns, because there is so much pride in our local governments in Connecticut, and it's really part of our culture, and that we take so much pride in how we govern ourselves in this little state of ours. And we are a very small state, and interestingly enough, within this very small state, we don't have county government. We're one of two states that does not have county government, the other being our friend next to us, Rhode Island. And we have 169 communities, each with their own structure and form of local government. Now, I know probably in my review of different models here, it's probably going to be a little redundant, because I was listening to Joe DeLong there, and I know he covered some of this already, but it's okay. I'll go through it again. But, we do have home rule in Connecticut. It's explicitly stated in their state constitution in Article 10. And it does give local communities considerable discretion and latitude regarding the style of government, that the people in the town choose. But the one thing that, and I know that Steve and I have spoken about this, some people, for some reason, think that towns are sovereign entities, but of course they are not. They're not like states, and even some textbooks actually make mistakes on that. I've noticed that we have 3 levels of distinct sovereign governments. We don't. We have we do have local government, but they are subdivisions of a state, and they're subject to state laws and even state approval of the type of government that the town ultimately adopts. And that was made abundantly clear by an Iowa Supreme Court justice named John F. Dillon many years ago, and that is known as Dillon's Rule. And so it's very clear in law and in a major court decision that the Supreme Court, also the U.S. Supreme Court, has affirmed that towns have, they might have discretion based on the home rule provision of their state constitution, but they are not sovereign. I was on a show a while back discussing this with a Yale law professor too, and we were talking about the controversy over in Woodbridge, Connecticut, where there was a very interesting, zoning issue going on, and there are people in Woodbridge who were making the argument that somehow their town was could not be the decision they make could not be reviewed by the Connecticut state legislature, and actually legally that is not an. They were absolutely wrong on that issue. But that said, we do know that with the home rule provision here in Connecticut, the state legislature has given. I don't know if Steve would agree with this, but I think that the state legislature has given towns considerable latitude, regarding the local community's preferred model of government. Not complete latitude, but considerable, I would say. So if you do, and again, I know that Joe has covered this, but I think it's good to cover it again. If you review all the 169 towns and cities in Connecticut, you will find essentially 4 different models of government. And let me just briefly go through those with you. Steve said to speak about 10 minutes, so that's what I've got here. Because Connecticut has so many little towns, the most common is the Board of Selectmen town meeting. That works very well in small communities. There's a Board of Selectmen with a popularly elected first selectman, and the board's proposals are presented to the residents of the town, who subsequently meet, openly debate, and vote on proposals. Now, to me, this model of government is the one I like the most, but obviously I'm not going to recommend it for Fairfield, for the town of Fairfield. Um, but it does most closely reflect the tradition of New England government, and I think it's a beautiful form of model, but it only works really in small towns. An example would be the town of Andover, population of approximately 3,200 people. For a town meeting to take place, the town charter says you have to have a quorum of 25 persons. Okay. Many issues are voted on and discussed at the Andover town meeting. If a quorum does not exist, then the charter allows the Board of Selectmen to make the decisions. But interestingly enough, in Andover, the town charter says that a town budget, however, cannot be made by the Board of Selectmen. That has to be a town meeting decision. So if you don't have the quorum, you have to try again to get the people there to vote on the town budget. I will be perfectly honest with you. This is my favorite model of government because it's the closest I think one can get to grassroots democracy. And, you know, I kind of the spirit of Jefferson there, grassroots democracy. And, you know, I seriously doubt that Fairfield, Connecticut, with a population of, and I looked it up before the forum here, of 61,512 people, that was according to the 2020 census, could function under this model. That would be very unrealistic. And furthermore, with almost 10,000 registered Republicans and over 14,000 registered Democrats and over 16,000 unaffiliated voters, I just don't think that a town meeting in Fairfield would work very well to actually make a decision. Although I will say that I think that would be very fun to watch. And I would love to see a town meeting that size with so much partisanship at work there. I think that would be fascinating. Now, the other model of government I heard Joe DeLong speak at great length about is the council manager form of government. There, of course, we do have a popularly elected and normally a pretty powerful town council that makes decisions for the community based on the advice and their working relationship with a town manager. Now, this model of government, it's a good model. It really is. It's essentially a model that combines representative government with administrative expertise. And town managers are selected by the town council, and they work very closely with the council on a range of issues. The manager does not have voting rights in a council, but he is required in most charters to attend town council meetings. And, you know, I heard a question that was raised, do town managers have to live in the community? Well, in my hometown of Cheshire, we used to have a Board of Selectmen town meeting model. They did away with that when nobody was showing up at the town meeting. I think the last recorded town meeting had like 3 people or something. But the town manager in Cheshire does have to live there because they feel that he or she, whoever it is, should have to live with the consequences of their decisions. Town managers are interesting people. As you heard Joe mention what the pay scale generally is, most of them do have a lot of expertise and normally a professional degree. One of my former students went on, got a master's in public administration program, and he now is a town manager up in some town in Vermont. But they normally are very objective administrators that are quite skilled often in the field of finance, I've noted. And so they really do have a range of executive and administrative functions. Now, the drawback to that model, and again, this is more me speaking than anything else, is that the town manager, a lot of people don't know who a town manager is. Somebody who works behind the scenes. I mean, you know, he goes to town council meetings. You'll read about him in the local paper if you're lucky. But a lot of people really can't name who their town manager is. They can name who the town councilors are, but it seems as if a town manager is this individual that's located in the town hall and everybody might know, some people might know where his office is, but he's not the choice of the people. He's not a people's representative like a mayor is or a council member. And the people don't vote to his or her reappointment. That's up to the council. But this model, I will say, does work quite well in moderate-sized towns. And I've already mentioned my own town of Cheshire, where we underwent reform a long time ago. It has about 30,000 people in our town. It works well. But then you have like the town of Plainville with 18,000 and the town of Berlin with 20,000, and they have the manager council system. Seems to be efficient, not terribly political, and it did come out of this whole town manager model came out of a middle class reform movement that really wanted to contribute to less partisan politics in a town. And as one who teaches political science, I can't say I'm crazy about that model because I like politics and I like political parties and I like robust elections and accountability. But nevertheless, the manager model is an effective model, I have to say, overall. Then, of course, there is a model that personally, again, this is more me, I'm hoping that Fairfield seriously considers. That's the mayor council form of government, found in Connecticut cities, but at the same time, you don't have to always find a model like that in an urban area. We have several towns with sizable populations, and even some towns with very small populations that function according to the mayor council model. You have Bridgeport, obviously, with a population of over 148,000. But then you have Wolcott, the town of Wolcott, a population of 17,000. And then you have Little Derby in the valley, town of 12,000. And last I looked, they had a board of aldermen model of government. So, there are towns similar in size to Fairfield. There are some. There's one like the town of Hamden, very similar, Steve's town, with almost an identical number of people that function according to the mayor council the mayor council model. But the demographics are different in Hamden, that's true, compared to Fairfield. But again, it works well in a town with about 61,000 people. So I really am trying, as I was thinking about tonight's forum, I was trying to think, why would not a model like that work in the town of Fairfield? And I can't come up with any reasons why it wouldn't. And the virtues of this model is that the people that are making policy for your towns are very visible. The mayor is obviously the focal point, of the decision-making process. Everyone would know who the mayor is. And the mayor would be somebody who would stand for re-election every 4 years and would be accountable. At the same time, you would have a council. That's the legislative body. Depending on how large your council would be, it doesn't have to be extremely large. That would also be accountable. And, you have executive power that is accountable, and you have legislative power that is accountable. So for a larger town like yours, I think it would work exceptionally well. And again, now, not to get too theoretical, but there's sort of a Madisonian dimension to that model of government that I like. Checks and balances with a strong mayor and a strong council working together. And I know that if you have partisan elections, sometimes you might have gridlock, but at the same time, that model also, I think, could foster compromise as well in a town. So that's a model I like for a community your size. And then, of course, the fourth model is your own. And there's just a handful of towns that operate according to the Board of Selectmen RTM model. It's an interesting model, kind of the hybrid model. Only a handful of towns. I noticed most seem to be, maybe Steve could verify this, seem to be in Fairfield County, actually, that are operating. I think Brantford is also one, I think.
Yeah, Brantford is one.
Brantford, yeah. Exactly why Fairfield County, I'm not sure if there's some type of economic dimension to that. I don't know, but it's interesting how they're all down that part of the state mostly. But it seems to be working quite well in your town, although, as I was looking at your model, correct me if I'm wrong, but the RTM members serve for 2 years. Is that right? They serve for 2, and then the Board of Selectmen serve for 4, and the first selectman serves for 4. And I just think that it's an interesting model, but what really concerns me about this model is, and again, I looked up, tell me if I'm right on this, you have like 50 members on the RTM, 54 or some 50, how many are on the RTM?
40.
40.
Up to 56, but they right now have 40.
Oh, it can go up to 56? Is that what you said?
According to the charter, yes.
Yeah. Oh, according to
But they have 40 right now.
And that's like, to me, an unwieldy legislative body to have that many. Whereas if you had a town council, consisting of, say, whatever, 13 people, 15 people, 9 even, you would know who they are and they would be more accountable. I don't know if everybody knows who the people on the RTM are. I don't know that. I kind of doubt they do. And accountability, to me, is a very important thing in government. As much democracy and as much accountability as possible is, to me, that's the model that you should maybe seriously consider. Obviously, a Board of Selectmen town meeting model, forget that. That's ridiculous. I love it, but not good for Fairfield. I don't think the town manager model would work very well in a town your size. So to me, the most logical reform would be the mayor council form, and I think there's something to be said for that. And that's my view on it. So I hope I kept that to about 10 minutes, Steve. All right.
Thank you, Professor. And I think I see the hands will go up very, very shortly after Professor Alberta finishes. I thank you for your survey of the forms of government and their application in Connecticut. Last but not least, although she was first here and still standing, and I appreciate the fact that she's been here for such a long time, is someone I'm particularly happy to introduce because she teaches in the department that I learned all of the stuff in at Fairfield University. I was a class of 74, and some of my greatest memories are in the building that she works in when there's not a pandemic. And so she's been at Fairfield since 2016, Professor Gail Alberta, an assistant professor of politics and public administration. Her teaching interests include election laws, election administration. I can't believe the things that she and I agree. I'm the first director of the State Elections Commission. And so it's wonderful to see her interest in that and political participation. And that's an important, I want to stop there for a second, not that I'm the speaker, but one of the things that we're looking at in some of the other communities I'm working in is what models work best for fostering participation. And ultimately that needs to be the objective, needs to be the goal. And I'm very interested that that's part of her background, and her interests are primarily at the local level. She has written in a recently released book, Why Don't Americans Vote? And she has written as well for the Review of Regional Studies. She teaches American government, campaigns and elections, state and local government, methods and statistics, and women in politics. Like Professor Rose, she has served as an analyst for the media. She has commented on local, state, and national politics for local, regional, national, and international print and broadcast media. And I am very, very pleased that she is here with us. And I apologize for the lateness of the start, but it's my honor to introduce Dr. Gail Alberta.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for the invite to come and speak. Many of you are familiar faces because I've worked with you in other capacities or on the strategic plan. Which seems like forever ago, the pre-pandemic life that we all had. Just to, for those, there's been a lot of questions. Let me just back that up. There's been a lot of questions about if you were to have someone like a city manager, what would that look like? And I do run the program and teach in a program, the MPA program here at Fairfield. I'm the director of it, that would train those individuals to do that. They're not very common out here, those kinds of jobs. They're very common in my home turf, which is the Midwest. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and Steve, you're probably just gonna have to set a timer, let me know when my 10 minutes is up, because I love this stuff. But is you have the opportunity, you have a really unique opportunity to look at what outcomes you want for your government. And that is the beauty of a charter revision. That is something that even, Thomas Jefferson, while he was referring to the Constitution, he did expect us to reflect back on government and try and figure out how to continuously improve it, how to continuously make it more perfect. So one of the questions that I'm just going to throw out there, and it's a question, I don't care what political party you're with, there is an answer that you can arrive at, which is, what are the goals of your government? Do you want more efficient services? Do you want higher voter participation? Do you want more accountability, more responsiveness, right? And as you start thinking about those things that you want, some of these things that, Joe and Gary and I have been talking about, and Steve, as you work through this process, will start to kind of filter in. Because each thing has, like life in general, each thing has pros and cons, right? And we just have to kind of move through there. So a couple things that I just want to highlight, building off of what both Joe and Gary so nicely laid out for us, is the New England town structure, right? It is something that was this great idea, very beholden. It came because, right, as Joe mentioned, we wanted to have more say and less kind of like divine right and rule. But the structure is a little bit archaic, if I can use that term, for today's needs. We live in a society where things just happen, right? It's 24/7, and we have social media and technology advances that, I doubt anyone who created the original charter way back when Fairfield was incorporated even dreamed about having. So if we can all agree that there needs to be improvement, then the question really does become, where do we want to go next? And it doesn't necessarily, the other thing that I want us to think about is it doesn't necessarily have to be in any of these silos, right? There is this beautiful thing called an adaptive city. That was not coined by me. It was coined by other scholars that I had the privilege of studying with in grad school. But it is basically a hybrid. Okay, so you can take a little bit of everything and the best of all the worlds and try and make something even better. So, for instance, you don't necessarily need to call your chief executive a mayor. Okay, however, there is, like Gary was saying, there is a lot of advantages to having a chief executive, and that's the term that I'm going to use. A chief executive, give it whatever title you want, first select person, mayor, whatever, and letting them have certain powers. That being said, we are a system of checks and balances. So there is also something to be said about having a legislative body with additional powers as well. So for instance, think about Congress or even our state legislator. When the president wants to appoint someone, they usually need confirmation in the Senate. That is a check and balance. Okay, so you can have a local chief executive appoint, let's say, members to boards, and the legislative body can sign off on them, right? Can approve of those nominations. You can have an executive that starts the budget process, much like we see the president do today, even though, not even that was always the case. And you can have a legislative body then, have that ability to have their say in it and go through subcommittees and committees and stuff along those lines. What powers you want each body to have is really the question that you need to think about, right? And no matter what power you give each entity, there is a way to check and balance that power so that no one entity, the legislative branch or the executive branch of your local government becomes, super strong or anything along those lines. And that is not, I get that could be a concern. That concern is kind of in the lifeblood of Americans, given, our history and why they declared independence in the first place. But even more so because you are a New England state, and I'm, I just moved to New England a few years ago, so I don't necessarily know if I'm technically a New Englander yet. But I think I'm getting there because I'm really, do love the Northeast. The other thing that I want you to think about too, and one of the things that I've been given a lot of thought to, is the political culture of your community. Okay, you are not Hamden. You are not New Haven. You are not Trumbull. You are not Bridgeport or Westport. You are Fairfield. And you have a unique political culture. And if that political culture is such that is not going to support X, Y, or Z, then we need to think about that, right? And then what is your political culture going to support? What is good for one person is not going to be good for another. That is in part the beauty of being able to have every town have their charter, right? You get to develop what is best for you and your community. So, have that in the back of your head as well. That doesn't mean you have to, go away from your New England roots. You can have a mayor and call it a first select person. You can have a council, but call it an RTM still. What that boils down to is the powers that you're given each entity, not the name. Okay. It boils down strictly to those powers. So if you think of them as just, titles, and then what's important is the work that you're doing to determine the powers that each one gets, that aligns then with your political culture. We then, can, I think you guys can see some amazing progress. And just to go back, since there was a lot of questions about managers, is that we have to remember too the reason why we have managers in the first place. And that was because we had a strong party system, right? And that led to the spoil system and patronage and things along those lines, where there ended up being a lot of corruption. Then we had the progressive era that introduced everything from grassroots campaigning and labor laws and, getting rid of child labor and direct election of our senators and paving the way for what is going to end up becoming candidate senate elections. Part of that movement to install city managers was to eliminate that corruption and to make sure that the parties were not super powerful, right? And doing, illegal things. So the idea was that that person would not be political, right? They would be there much like a CEO with an MBA. You come in, you do X, and that's it, right? And there's weight to that. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but that's the history there. We don't have strong parties anymore. Okay, we have a very weak party system in the United States, and most localities have nonpartisan elections. The fact that you guys do have partisan elections is very unique, okay, for local governments. So, the question then I would ask you to ask yourselves is, if you were to move to a manager system, why, right? Make sure, again, it's meeting these goals of what is it that you desire? Do you want accountability? Do you want responsiveness? If responsiveness and accountability are the things that you value in your political culture and on this committee and you want for your town government, maybe that's not the best choice, because you can't fire as voters. There's no way that a voter can go in and fire a city manager. There's no way that you can look at the city manager and say, hey, I don't like what you're doing, and hold them accountable as a resident of that town. You can do that with a first select person or a mayor. You can do that with RTM. Okay. The other thing too, that if you're thinking about responsiveness, it has to be in this idea that the ability to act fast, right? And the ability to not act fast and make, on the whim decisions, right? We don't necessarily need decision making akin to, if y'all seen Up, right? You got Doug and he sees a squirrel and all of a sudden he's like off in his own zone, right? And then he's like forgets what's going on. We don't want decision making like that, but we want responsive and responsible decision making, and you can do that with a smaller RTM. And you can even think about, again, this hybrid model is most times with council managers, we see most often they also adopted at-large districts. And at-large districts would be that the whole town would elect like 10 people to council, right? If there's 10 districts. And they wouldn't necessarily, or 10 seats, they wouldn't necessarily be the districts like what you have here at Fairfield, where you have a district and that's your district and you run in that district and only voters in that district can vote for you. That usually happens and falls under mayor council systems. Okay. And again, the reason that was changed was because of the corruption issues. And the idea that, well, we have to think about the town as a whole, not just my district. So something that you could do is even think about is having, like, let's say 2 people run for each district. So each district in your town, so you have, I think, 10 districts, and correct me if I'm wrong there, 10 districts. So you have 2 people running in each district. That is 20 people. And then you have 2 or 3 at-large people who run, and they have to get everybody in the town to vote for them, right? And then that creates, again, this idea where you're incorporating both. So you have districts that are electing individuals who care about things like, I care about the beach because I live in the beach. I don't live in Greenfield Hills, right? I care about what's going on in the university district, not necessarily what's happening over in Strathfield Village. And then you have these at-large people who have to think very akin to an executive, right? Your chief executive, because they're elected to represent the whole town. And so that could be something that you could go to. And then that also means that you're cutting RTM in half. And that can be very valuable because then you're able to not only get better candidates to run, and there'll be no empty ballots or people just signing up to be, I'll put my name on the thing, but I'm not going to show up to meetings, right? So you have people who are going to be vested, people who are going to want it. You're going to see more competitive elections probably because of that. And which then again leads to higher turnout, accountability, because if you don't do something that voters like, they're going to know who did it. Right now, if y'all do something, and I live in Fairfield, and I don't know I don't know who's responsible. Is it which RTM member? Is it my people? Is it not my people? Is it, your first select person? Like, I don't know, right? There's too many ways to point the finger and hold anybody accountable. So those are just like foods, little things for food for thought. And and the other thing that I would encourage you to think about is the roles that everybody plays in your government system. So you have your first select person, which is Brenda Kupchak right now, and then you have your board of first select persons, and then you have your board of finance. And your board of finance is really unique in that most time the monetary aspect of anything is given to your chief executive and your legislative body. But with your board of selectmen, my understanding is that there's 3, right? And generally speaking, I would ask you just to think about how many times has it been a 2-1 vote or a 3-0 vote, and what role do those other 2 people play versus having something like a strong executive. And by strong, I don't necessarily mean like crazy strong mayor. Okay, so when we think, strong mayor, we're thinking veto power, we're thinking budgetary power, appointment power, right? The list goes on and on and on. And that is something that, Steve and Joe could easily get you in data. But, a single chief executive with a deputy, very akin to governor, lieutenant governor, or president, vice president, right? And then you give them some of that responsibility, and then that makes also it more efficient too. So one of the things that voters want and residents want from their governments is efficiency, it's effectiveness, it's responsiveness, and it's accountability. And so if you're not able to provide those things, you're not going to be good service providers. You're not going to be good, and you're not going to be a place where people are going to go, yes, I want to come there and live, because you're not able to get things through in a timely fashion, right? And your voters aren't able to hold anybody accountable, and they don't feel like they are part of the system. They're going to have higher voter apathy. And so that is something that I would suggest you consider too. And I'm sure I went well over my 10 minutes, and Steve was nice enough to allow me to do that. So I'm just going to call it a day and throw it back at you.
Thank
I'm going to
you.
get excited.
You told us you were going to get excited about it, and you did. That's great. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you to both professors. I'll turn it back to the chair to seek out questions from members.
Yeah, thank you both very much to both professors. It was very informative. I think right off the bat, we've got a question from John Wynn.
Sure. Thank you both, Professor Rose and Professor Alberta. And Professor Alberta, very good seeing you again. Thank you for your additional time on serving the needs of our town. Dr. Alberta was very helpful in the work that we did as part of the strategic plan. I have a question regarding Dr. Rose's mayor council form and the adaptive city description. And it relates to, you know, our objectives, I think, as a community, to not limit or, you know, or to improve accountability, not limit it by any means. Ensure that we have representation, representative legislative form of government, make sure that we're effective. But what would be the person or the individual that would help us achieve the execution, the management, and the risk management needs of the larger, more complex community that we are part of now? That's the one thing I didn't see in the mayor council form, Dr. Rose, and I wasn't sure exactly how you would describe it in the adaptive city advocacy that you were describing, Dr. Roberta. So how do we achieve that effectiveness of the town manager role in these types of political, societal, organizational structures we're talking about?
Yeah, well, you know, I just respond to the mayor's office. I'm thinking of, for example, up in Hartford, Luke Bronin. You know, he has. Now I know that that's a much larger place than Fairfield, but nevertheless, mayors have staffs. They bring in, you know, what you might say are the equivalent of cabinet officers, even though obviously that's not the right term. But often they have a chief of staff. They have key administrative individuals whom they appoint to do, you know, the nitty gritty work that I think you're referring to. And so it is true. I mean, a mayor does not have the real. Most mayors don't have the real training that, say, a town manager has. But the executive component of that model, you can bring in people with those skills to do, I think, to address the concerns that you have in mind, like the finance parts of things. And so it's not just a mayor working with the town council. I mean, the mayor has an administration, and that's part of the system, of course. And you know, Hamden, it seems to work pretty well in Hartford and others. And so I don't see why you couldn't have, you know, a number of key subordinates within the executive branch, within the executive model there, to work closely with the mayor on those real specific, precise concerns. And of course, you know, a lot of it would have to go over to the town council to be approved and to be voted on. But I think that can be done, sure. Maybe Gail, did you?
Yeah, so without getting into the weeds and being like, okay, well, let's look specifically at what you're thinking about doing with the town. one of the things that you can do is if you have, let's just say mayor council for right now, since those are the terms that we're using, okay? You can have your mayor, and you have then all of these department heads, right? That can then be either appointed by the mayor and then confirmed by the body, right? And maybe the legislative body. And maybe part of that then is indeed saying like you need to have these degrees, right? You need a degree in finance, you need a degree in public administration, you need a degree in this, or 5 years experience or what have you, right? Very akin to like the merit system that we see at the federal level. But it would be more through an appointment process. And the other thing is that you can open it up like a very much akin to a merit system where, you have this finance officer or let's say budget head, whatever, director of the budget. And in order to be that position, you have to have 5 years experience, you have to have an MBA, you have to have this, right? But then the question becomes then you need to be able to pay for it, right? And that's fine because you're going to get good quality people, right? So, and that there's nothing wrong with, paying for good quality things. So that would be one way you could do it. And then, the reality is if those people are performing well, the voters can then look to the mayor or look to council and be like, hey, y'all, I went and got my dog license and that was a, whole debacle. I'm done. Plus you ain't picking out my garbage and my park is closed and I don't got my ice skating rink this year. You know what I mean? The list goes out. Like there is a way to be accountable, right? The problem with, on the flip side of just having one person responsible that, has those qualifications, those degrees is the accountability thing, and the responsive thing. If everybody wants, let's say, something, a new business, Amazon, to come to their town. And the town manager is like, well, that's not viable. Like, we're going to do this instead. It makes more money and it's not a loss of revenue or whatever the case may be, right? Then what? How are voters going to hold that person accountable, right? And that's just like, it's a far-fetched example, but, those would be some ways where you could do the blend.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the town charter, the city charter up in Hartford. God, I thought I was looking at the White House up there. There seemed to be such an incredible administrative structure to the way that they were running that city there. So that's can be done. Sure. Yeah. I'm sorry. The phone ringing.
Oh no, Attorney Mednick, I think.
I resemble that remark, Professor Rose. I wrote that charter, but I took dictation. The members of the Charter Commission wrote the charter. I just helped them. One of the things I wanted to point out, and I hope you don't mind that I'm butting in here, because I thought it would be useful to intercede while the professors are talking about this. In one of my communities, it was Hamden. It's all public, and I'll be honest with it. Hamden has a structure. In fact, one of the people I am inviting 2 weeks from now is the former acting mayor and council president of the Hamden Legislative Council. So you might be able to examine them closely as well, because Hamden's had financial difficulties. But one of the things we were looking at in the charter revision that we had last year, and actually we just reconvened it 2 nights ago for a short revamp, was to take a look at, there was a lot of pressure to go to professional town management, because their opponents to the former mayor believed that the political management is what caused the problem in Hamden. We won't get into the details of that, but that was an argument. One of the things the Charter Commission tried to find, was a middle ground. And one of the things I recommended to them was that continue with the mayor-council form of government, but why don't you go to kind of a mini version of what Professor Rose was talking about with the mayor in Hartford, who has a chief operating officer in their community. Mayor of New Haven has a chief administrative officer. Those are very political positions. They're hired by the mayor, serve at the pleasure of the mayor. Town of Darien, it's not just big cities. Town of Darien has a town administrator. And so what I tried to do is come up with a model that was akin to that, but that was moving in the professional management model by having the mayor appoint a professional chief operating officer, chief administrative officer, whatever you want to call it, not a political chief of staff, not the mayor's personal chief of staff to help the mayor keep all the balls in the air, but somebody who is a professional administrator who works for the mayor, works for the council, in effect, hired by the mayor, probably to a term. In a lot of cities, department heads get terms of office for 4 years because you're not going to attract top-notch operators of departments without giving them a term of office. So maybe you hire an administrator for a 5-year term, for 1 year more than the mayor, so that the person is not a political person. The next mayor would have to spend a year. If the mayor doesn't have, if there's overlap, the next mayor gets to deal with the administrator for at least a year or for some period of time. So the idea was to create a professional manager, but maintain the mayor-council form of government. And so I wanted to pose that as an alternative. And it's not just a big city issue. Some of the smaller communities do have administrators as well. And I just wanted to pose that idea since it was pertinent to this conversation.
Okay, I think next up is John Matola, who's got his hand up.
And John is on mute.
John is on mute. He's
I'm
no
good.
longer
I'm
on
off
mute.
mute. Actually, just following what Steve just said, I've lived here for practically my whole life, and we have pretty much over the years, but up until recently, have had those professional department heads who would serve under different administrations for years and years. So you had that professionalism. And I think one thing we as a group need to do is look at that, because it's very unclear in our charter. If someone, the first select person appoints, let's say the head of DPW head, I think the way I read a charter right now, that's an appointment that's made, because if I recall, it doesn't say to a term, but that person is appointed and has the job and can't be terminated except for just cause. So I think we need to clarify that. We had a DPW head in town here for 30 years who did a great job. So if we're concerned about getting more professionalism, I think this group really needs to look at that. So I just wanted to comment on that, follow up on that. Thank you.
John Wynn.
I don't want to monopolize it, so if someone else has a question, please flag or jump in. But I just wanted to follow up on the thread of the discussion that we're having, particularly, Steve, as it relates to the observation that you were making. I recognize there's what has happened in many of the communities, and I won't just comment on ours, is the political role has taken on the management role, and it's turned into a very robust, involved type of position. The requirements and the things that need to be managed possibly outgrew those individuals, but they were in place and they were working really hard, 24/7, some of them, and the compensation rose along with it. But what would happen now, where we would have a mayor of a certain stature and characteristics and a council, and then you have to bring in in your description, chief operating officer, and others' description, town manager, which is a reasonably well compensated role to bring into the town. And you have a highly compensated mayor and a highly compensated town manager. Would the mayor then become slightly, from not just a monetary standpoint, but from a management standpoint, less significant than the chief operating officer or the town manager?
In my view, the town wouldn't be a town manager. If you have a town manager form of government, the mayor becomes more of a presiding officer of a council and more of a titular figure. But in what I was talking about, the mayor still is, under the state model, the Connecticut model, the chief executive officer of the community, and would still be the boss of the professional administrator. The professional administrator would have some more protection in their job than a political appointee might have, but would be subordinate to the mayor. And yes, you'd be adding another significant salary, but take a look at the boards of education and the salary for school superintendents running that side of the government. Take a look at the university world, where there are administrators who make more than presidents of universities. So the chief executive officer doesn't necessarily need to be the highest paid executive, but still has executive authority over other people who may have more specialized functions. So yeah, there would be a cost element to that, but the question becomes, and you may not need it. If you have professional department heads, if you have accountability there, if the mayor has, or the first selectman has the appointment authority, and that's not true in all the departments. Some of your departments are appointed with the acquiescence of the first select woman to the appointment of that board or commission. But if you go to a strictly executive model where the appointments are made by the executive and approved, I think Professor Alberta talked about that, approved by an RTM or a council, then you might be able to do that. And if they have terms of office where they have some degree of protection, so you could attract professional people who are not as political as you might get in a pure political form of government, then you might be able to get to that place without hiring a highly paid professional in that job. And Fairfield is different than other communities. You're in pretty good financial shape in Fairfield. So I don't think we're looking at a model to correct a problem. We're looking at a model that might improve responsiveness or accountability. But the model I came up with for this other town was a direct result of their financial difficulties. I think Professor Alberta has a hand up, and
and I have a question for her too. So,
oh, would you like to ask your question first?
No, I'd like you to go with your thought first.
Okay. So a couple different things that I've been jotting down some notes while everybody's been talking and asking questions is one thing to think about, and that Steve highlighted. I do a lot of participation studies, and local elections tend to have low voter turnout anyways, right? Especially in Connecticut, because your elections are in odd years. Okay, so they're not concurrent with any other major races. Generally speaking, if you have what I'm going to say is an absent chief executive, so whether it is a mayor in name only, or if you go straight to a council manager system, right, and the mayor is not a way that we would see one now, like a first select person, or like the mayor of Bridgeport, right, or the mayor of Detroit. Turnout goes down, and it's not something that people will get all excited for just RTM or council races. And so here's my that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're gung-ho about low voter turnout, right? The problem lies then in when people turn out, they're the ones that then get to elect the elected officials who then make the policy. So then my question to you is whose voice is being heard? The voters. And you have, let's say, only 20% of your voters turning out normally, and that's going to drop to 10% or lower, then who's really governing the town, right? And you're going to get these biases. We call them policy biases. You're going to get these biases then in what kind of services you're seeking, the delivery of those services, which is the role of local government. Your whole job is to provide residents with services and delivery of those services and provisions of goods that aren't otherwise available in these other levels of government. So, and then if that policy bias exists and it grows and it continues to grow because of this low voter turnout issue that just plagues American elections to begin with, then my question to you is, whose voices is going to be recognized, and then where is that going to leave the town, right? Down the road. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So just keep that in the back of your heads as you're moving forward. As it's all I would encourage you to do. The other thing you have to keep in the back of your minds is that no offense to any of you on this call, y'all might not be here after your next election, right? So as you're moving forward, creating this new government system, think about what you want it to be, even post you, right? Post your position, post your election, or if you resign or you're voted out or whatever. What is it that you want to see as a citizen 10, 20, 30 years down the road? What kind of government system is going to give your kids and their kids, if they stay in Fairfield, the best government that you can create for them? So I would say keep that in the back of your head too, as you move through this. Isn't about just, where I sit now, or, which party's in power now, or, who's elected now, or who's going to be elected next year, or, whatever. It's about the legacy of your town. And that's a very big responsibility, which is not something I envy by any means. I'm glad I get to be, the person to come in and talk to you, and not the decision maker. But I would definitely encourage you to keep those little nuggets in the back of your head, because I think they will help you as you move through this process and answer these questions that you've been raising, which are fabulous questions, but may prove to be beneficial down the road.
Oh, I see, Pam, you have your hand up, but I just wanted to follow up with Professor Alberta. You had mentioned, Professor, that despite the names, whether it be mayor, first select person, or council or RTM, it really was about the powers that they're given. And so what types of powers, in particular, if we were looking at some type of alternative form, would change, notwithstanding what the names of them are? Like what should we be looking at all I keep hearing is that, make it, the executive makes an appointment and the body confirms it, but okay, what else other than that?
You could adjust budgetary authority.
Okay.
You could do, so you have appointment power, you have budgetary authority, you got veto power. You would have, in essence, lawmaking, right? What the legislative body does, instead of just, signing off on things, right? You could give the legislative body stronger, quote unquote, lawmaking responsibilities. There are, without looking back at, textbooks, there's
Right.
a lot of different things that you could do, and then the question is if you want those entities to have that power, where does that power lie now? And how would you like to see that moved around?
Okay.
But budgetary power and veto power are usually the two things that come up the most in stuff like this, as well as appointment powers.
All right. And Pam had a question. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Brian. Pam Iacono. Thank you both for being here tonight. My question is surrounding boards of selectmen and what your experiences are, if any, throughout the state with this type of government. And the conversation to me is sort of lending itself to what's the purpose of having a board of selectmen when you have a board of finance and an RTM. Our last discussion surrounded the budget process, and it sort of percolated to the top that the Board of Selectmen really doesn't even need to vote on the budget. It can just go straight from the first select woman to the Board of Finance. So we don't necessarily need them in that regard. Now we're having discussions with, appointments of committees. Those could make a smaller RTM more powerful. And, that could be the check and balance on that type of thing. So what's the history or experience, if you know of any, that would lend us to want to keep this Board of Selectmen role in place? Like, why do we need those three? And to your point before, yeah, they either vote the two that are in the same party, or, it's, yeah. I'm not seeing it.
Well, I think one of the reasons why they have a board of selectmen and then, of course, another body is to at least allow some type of balance in power. And my understanding is that, depending on how many people you have on the board, nevertheless, it was created. A board of selectmen was created in order to forge some type of consensus before either a town meeting or in your case, an RTM would then vote on an issue, as opposed to just a singular individual. And it really was supposed to be to have some type of deliberation within within a board of selectmen, as opposed to just one individual presenting proposals. And I believe that was, that's probably some of the motivation, at least, for having 3, 5 people or whatever on a board of selectmen, is to forge at least some consensus before the legislative body makes a decision on it. I think that's probably one of the reasons why. Quite frankly, I mean, I'm not crazy about a board of selectmen. I really have never been in favor of that. And again, I come back to what I said earlier about having a more empowered mayor with a team of advisors. And I just think that lends itself to more, a more effective and more directed type of leadership in a local community. But maybe Steve or Gail could comment on the Board of Selectmen motivation. At least I see it as having some type of body that forges consensus before but you have 3 in,
Yes.
You have 3 in fair. Yeah. Some type of consensus should be forged, at least before the RTM examines an issue.
Professor Alberta, I know you did, and Pam mentioned you spoke to this. Did you have any?
Yeah, so I will say I am not very familiar with the Board of Selectmen process until I moved out here. The Midwest and the West are vastly different, even the South, right, than this. This is very much a New England thing. That being said, the one thing that I will point out is there is a reason why our state our state government and our federal government has a single chief executive. Okay. That was something that, during the founding was discussed very heavily. You can read all about it in our Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, should you desire. But one of the things that, in fact, if you read, I think it was Federalist number 72, there was concern, might have been 70, but that you get too many cooks in the kitchen, right? And here's the thing: if the first select woman's office or first select board presents, and again, please excuse me if I'm not quite using all the correct lingo for how it works in your particular town, but they present in some sort of proposal. The idea, like Gary was saying, would be this collaborative effort. But what happens then when there's no collaboration? What happens when everybody has the same idea? So what happens when, Brian and John and, Brenda and Gary and me and Steve, and we all are trying to come up with like one single thing, right? What ends up happening is you get muddy policy, right? You get muddy proposals. And again, there's no responsibility, right? Because if it's like, oh, well, Gail said that, I'd be like, no, I didn't. Right? Like, good luck. And the other thing that, they were concerned about, and the reason that they developed a single chief executive, was because that there would be times where you would try to undermine each other. Right. So I am going to use poor Steve here, since he invited me to this call. And I think he'll play along. Right. So if we are both sitting there trying to act as chief executives and I don't like what he's saying, I'm going to undermine him. And it might not necessarily be very forthright, where I'm going to be like, hey, so Steve, about that, I'm going to bury it. But it's going to happen, right? We are humans by nature. And with that comes emotions and likes and dislikes. And sometimes the inability to, harness that and, kind of keep it, down. So that pettiness can evolve. And instead of having a presidency where there was multiple presidents, which is something they were considering, like a board of presidents, they nixed it because of these issues, right? And then what role do these extras serve, right? Are they just going to try and block everything? if they don't agree with this one person in power? Are they going to try and undermine it? Are they just going to be like, sure, we'll sign off on everything, right? And then what happens when you don't like it? You know, if it's me and Steve and, you know, Gary proposing something and y'all don't like it, I can be like, well, that was Steve's fault. And Steve can go like, oh, it's Gary's fault. Gary can go, it's Gail's fault. Right. And then you're going like, well, who the heck should we fire? Right. So that would be, you know, the argument for a strong one person thing.
The only thing I'd say is don't pick on me, because when I was in Florence, I bowed at the grave of Machiavelli. So, you know.
Nice.
May I ask a question of the town people here? Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. You know, I got a call by Steve, and I was asked to participate in this. Gail, I know, has been on the strategic planning committee talking to you already, and you know, I don't live in Fairfield, although I work at Sacred Heart University. By the way, that is in Fairfield, not Bridgeport. Half of it at least. And I guess one thing that I haven't really learned yet, and maybe just one of you could give me a short answer on this, is why is this happening? Why is charter revision actually taking place? Normally, there's something that has been perceived as dysfunctional.
I'm in a meeting.
So what is the answer to that? I just like somebody to tell me that.
Can I respond to that?
I don't care who it is. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
So, John Mattula, I think we haven't looked at our charter for over 10 years, and so there was a thought process of looking at it and seeing if we need to make some changes and to see if we can maybe do things a little bit better. But your question kind of leads me to ask both of you a question, because I don't think we've focused on it really. Isn't it terribly important to look at what we do well in town? And I'm going to give you some examples. We've averaged about a 2% tax increase over the last 10 years. We have great schools. We have a AAA bond rating. We have great recreational opportunities. We have $36 million in our reserve fund. We do have professionals in some of the town departments running the town departments. And we have, I think we learned that there's about 300 citizens who are engaged in our government in some capacity through elected officials or volunteers on committees. So to me, that's really important to look at. Things really work well, and it seems like we need to be cognizant of that. And I would like, and I'm all for looking at making things better, but I would like each professor to comment on that. Isn't that very important to look at what we do well? And it's a town that people are still moving to. If not, they're not leaving.
Yeah, of course, it is important. But I guess my question was, what was the impetus behind this? Was it just, as you say, because you haven't reviewed the charter in 10 years, or has there been some type of displeasure in the community?
Maybe it's John Wayne. I could possibly jump in and provide a perspective.
Sure, go ahead, John.
I think one component builds upon what John Mattula said. We haven't looked at the charter. I think the state advocates for looking at your charter every 10 years. I believe we have not looked at ours for 15 years. However, a second key reason is the strategic planning process that we went through, where we had extensive feedback from thousands of town residents. A number of them brought up the topic of, are we managing ourselves in the most effective fashion? Should we be looking at how we go about improving, capitalizing on what we do well, but improving upon the things that we have that are problematic? During the whole time the strategic planning process was taking place, the town was experiencing multiple problems that were a result of ineffective management, inefficiency, possibly poor risk management that has resulted in very significant financial challenges for the town. And I would say that the combination of those three things is what has brought us to this place. And part of changing our government, the requirement is to go through a charter revision process, which is why the commission was formed. That's one person's opinion.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So I
Okay,
think
no.
is it my turn now?
Okay, sure.
So I will just say this, John, you're not wrong with being proud of the successes that this town has had. You know, it is a great town. It's one of the reasons why I took the job that I took here. I kind of fell in love with the area in my weekend visit, or my whatever it was, my 3-day visit. You know, and that being said, you know, when you're thinking about this revision process, you don't have to, you know, quote unquote fix what's not broken, right? However, you can always make some things better, right? That's why we see, like, you know, the iPhone come out with multiple new editions, right? Because they're improving, they're taking what's good and making it better, and they're taking what's bad and they're fixing it, right? Or what could be improved and fixing it. And I know this is a silly, you know, kind of analogy, but that's how I would encourage us to think about the process. Keep what's good, right? And then ask yourself, okay, how did we get here? And why are people coming here? You know, and then ask yourselves, how satisfied are citizens with what we're doing? How satisfied are they, you know, post some of the things that have been happening in your town, right? That are big issues. And what is it that we can do? And was there things that we could have done to make sure that we had better checks and balances, that we are more responsive, that we are more accountable to our residents that we serve, right? You serve at the pleasure of your voters, of your residents, your neighbors, you know, and that comes, you know, hate to use the Spider-Man quote, right? But, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, or, you know, something to that effect. And sorry, I have children who love Marvel. And you know, so think about it that way too, right? It just because you're thinking about ways in which you could change your government doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing a bad job right now, right? It does mean that, like anything, there are ways to improve, and there always is. You know, even as a human, right? We always find ways to improve and make ourselves a better people. And look at it that way. And you are going to give the next generation of Fairfield, no matter what you, hopefully, no matter what you decide in this process, a better version of Fairfield, and then hopefully they will give their kids a better version of Fairfield, right? Like you're starting to build that, and that's you know, really cool, very scary, but you know, like I said, I hate to be you guys, but don't envy that at all. But it's a really cool legacy that you get to leave, and I think you know, keeping that in mind as you move through the process is key.
Very well said. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments at this time? So I think, Steve, is that are we kind of at the end of the program at this point?
I think we are. Thank you very, very much to the professors. And I'm sure we'll be talking again at some point. I've got to get Gary Rose to autograph his book for me at the very least.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you for inviting me, Steve. It was great to work with Gail again. Really, this has been terrific. And all of you, I in the town of Fairfield, I really wish you, you know, good luck with this effort, or whatever you end up with, status quo, and improving the status quo, a new model, whatever. But it's exciting, that's for sure. It really
We'll have
is.
you back for the ribbon cutting.
Okay.
I would say likewise to what Professor Rose said. And it was nice coming out and seeing so many familiar faces and then seeing some new ones. And good luck with everything. And happy to address questions, Steve, as they come up, if you ever need us to come back.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you
for all
both.
your time and patience. Thank
Okay.
you.
Take care,
And
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now. We'll see
bye-bye.
you. Okay.
So I believe we do have a few other items to get to this evening. Item number 5 on the agenda is
Yeah, the hour's getting late. How much do you want to do on this? This is what I provided you with as item number 5 is a preliminary markup of the budget section, which I had some feedback on, did some terminology changes. There were not a lot of massive, to John Matola's point, massive restructuring issues because, again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I did include in here, in very broad terms, again, because your budget provision is a very skeletal provision. I did put reference to the capital budget to make the capital budget process simultaneous with the general fund process, so they would be aligned. They would go side by side. One of the other documents I provided was background document 5, which is a fairly robust or substantial document that lays out different capital budget requirements and processes in mainly the RTM towns, I think. I think it was mainly from the RTM towns, although there was an exception, Hamden, because we did a lot of interesting work in the Hamden budget process. I included Hamden in there as well. So this is kind of preliminary review. If you take a look on the side, I wasn't expecting any action on it this evening. If anybody had a chance to read it, if there are any glaring omissions on my part, please feel free to throw whatever tomatoes. It's a nice thing about Zoom. They won't hurt or really mess up my clothes, and just your screen. So, you know, so I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the body as to how much we want to go through this evening. You know, but I would suggest that we do take a look at it in the next few weeks, that we try to find some time to begin to start deliberating on provisions as we move forward. So I just wanted to get a markup out so you can take a look at it.
So the markup is just related to back to the capital budget provisions, or was one of the other documents in it have other markups in it?
No, this is the only, what you have in this document in current budget provisions in the charter for discussion is your budget provision. The addition, the red line you will see are some changes in language. The vice chair actually had suggested one change, and that motivated me to take a look at some other changes to try to make sure that we had clarity in terms of what each of the steps are and what the budget is called as it goes through the various steps in the process. The other thing that's in here that came from Ms. Gardner is she had talked about eliminating the publication requirement. And what I wanted to show you is I've come up with a tentative term. Remember, I'm going to work on a definition section that will not be in this section, but I'm creating it out of this section. Is what is notice, what is public notice, what does publication mean? And so rather than repeat it 3 or 4 or 5 different times in the charter, it would be a defined term. But again, there were no real substantive changes. There are some questions. One of them is, what is the role of the Board of Selectmen in this process, and versus the role of the first selectman? Is there a need for a budgetary role for the Board of Selectmen? That's one of the issues that came up. It was not for me to decide that, but it was for me to raise the question in the side notes here. And that's it. I don't know what else to say.
I think Pam has a question or comment
Okay,
on this.
thank you.
So I was interested in exploring a compressed timeline for the budget. Is that something I tell you now? Like, how do we, or we wait for when we get into the budget?
Yeah, but the what I will say, Pam, I know people brought that up.
I mean, this came up again last night at the Board of Education meeting. They don't have their insurance number. So can we bump this out a month and start the process in March instead of starting it in January and still end in May?
Well, I know people have been saying that people aren't going to have their numbers. And most of the time when you're formulating a budget, and I'm sure the chair will say this for the legislature as well, you don't really have all of your numbers. Budgets are generally estimates. You want to have as many hard numbers as you can in a budget, but we don't have all the state numbers in a budget, in a local budget, especially if you're adopting a local budget, unless you're dealing with the biennial budget, you have an estimate of what is in the budget. If your budget is approved by the second week in May or the first week in May, the General Assembly runs through June. So we
I know,
very often,
but you're using logic there. We
Okay.
don't operate like that.
All right.
How we operate is real numbers, and that's the culture. And I don't think we're going to be able to move off of that culture. So I'm wondering if we
So
can
you can move
change
it later.
this.
You can move it later if you want. If that's
That's
what
that I'd like to have that discussion, and it doesn't need to be tonight, but I would like that to be a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
To that this is due,
Thanks,
30
John.
days before.
Yeah, the longer you wait, the big issue in a lot of towns on the date of completion of a budget was usually the end of May, the beginning of June, because the tax collector needed 30 days to print out the tax bills. In the modern world, it doesn't take that long. With computer technology, tax collectors don't need 30 days to formulate the bills and get the bills out. So you could have an end date that's later, and you can have a start date that starts later. You don't have a lot of dates in this charter, but I think you can start it later and you can end it later if you want.
John, did you have something to say on the TOA, on the timing or anything at all for that matter?
No, I just a couple of things, and I don't want to keep us here too late. I kind of have agreement with Pam on some of the dates, but I think that's something we can look at. And a lot of this is contingent on where we go in the next few weeks. I mean, if this commission wants to go in a totally different direction, this whole budget process may be thrown out the window anyway, right? So, but assuming it's going to stay like it is, and just for our purposes, I appreciate adding the capital language, and I would, we're going to keep this type of form, and I would want to look at that a little more detail. I love some of the language that you gave us from some of these other municipalities on the capital budget. So I think that's something to look at. And I think maybe going to Pam's point too is I do think if we're going to stay in this, respecting everyone and where we're going, if we're going to stay in this model, I do think there's something to be said about, I'm not saying this disrespectfully, but maybe the Board of Selectmen isn't part of the budget process as was suggested at our last meeting 2 weeks ago, because the Board of Selectmen members can participate as ex officio members at a Board of Finance meeting when we're presenting the budget. And so that takes one step out of the process, which I think would appease some individuals in the first select woman's office. It may make things a little more efficient. So that's really all I have to say. But again, I don't think we have to debate that tonight because we don't know where we are yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to get this out to you based on what happened last time. But I think you're absolutely right, Commissioner, that let's see what happens in the next few meetings as we look at the forms of government and figure out what your direction is, what your thoughts are about that, because that might impact this as well. So happy to do that. And if you have thoughts, all of you have, I don't send you PDFs, I send you Word documents. So if you want to mark things up, if you want to look at the language I gave you and said, I think this is good language for capital budget, please start thinking about that stuff. It would be very helpful to me as we have to start drafting.
Well, great. Any other comments on this? And thank you for getting that to us, Steve. Chris Brogan.
Yeah, hey, Steve, thanks very much for this, and thank you for considering my comments I sent you. Just a quick thing. I did look, and I appreciate all the information you said on the other towns. I think two things maybe to add in that I think I heard comments on at the other meeting. One was adding in the requirement for a 5-year look ahead. I saw that in a couple of the towns that look like a good idea. And then the other thing I saw, and I think this is for Branford, they called it a capital projects balance report. But I remember somebody saying, it was Chairman Brown, but how these capital projects would be put out and there's officially no way for that to come back to the Board of Finance. So maybe if we put in just something like that, the annual report would be a good idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Westport had some good stopgap language in there that I think we should look at adopting.
Good. That's why I handed it out. Good. I'm glad you're reading it.
Yeah, there are a couple of good things in there. From a lot of the different municipalities that we don't have that we should, that are good. They're good practices.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, if there are no other questions on the budget, let me talk 2 minutes about our next meeting. I know it's 9:25. I think I might have referred earlier. At the next meeting, I'm looking at the list of people I'm trying to bring to the next meeting. I'm going to have people who are from a town manager form of government. I have one speaker that I'm inviting who is actually a former mayor, who is now a town manager, so she could talk about her experience in both forms of government. I'm looking at, one guy I have locked in is the former acting mayor and council president of Hamden, which is a hybrid legislative body. I'm trying to bring Branford in as well, and I've invited the mayor of West Hartford, which is a town manager form of government. Matt Hart, who's a longtime town manager, has just left, so I've invited Sherry Cantor, who's a political player, to come in and talk about how that community has operated in their town manager form of government. And I've invited Dan Rosenthal, I'm naming him because I did invite him and he's accepted, who's the first selectman of Newtown. Newtown is a smaller town, but they're doing some very innovative and interesting things. And he has, to Gail Alberta's point about participation, some interesting views and concerns about public participation. And we had a conversation about a totally separate thing, and this came up, and I said, I want you on a panel because I want you to talk about that. That has moved him away from the town meeting form of government that they've had toward more of a legislative form of government. So they've got an interesting kind of hybrid concept in Newtown, smaller town than Fairfield, but Dan is a very, very thoughtful guy, and I thought he would be a great speaker. So that just gave you a little preview of who we're going to have at the next meeting, but these are the real practitioners. These are the people in the field who operate in the field, and nothing's theoretical for them.
Great. That sounds like a good. That sounds like a lot of people. Have all those people been locked in?
They're not all locked in yet.
Okay. All right.
If you have any thoughts, let me know.
Okay. Yeah, we could chat. Perfect. Or if anybody else has any thoughts too, can hear them now or as the process continues. Thank you though very much for that. The next, so that would be, did we just cover next steps?
That was next steps.
That's good. All right. Let me just have one item.
Well, before we move to the last item, I just wanted to thank Councilor Mednick and the panel you put together for this evening. I know you'll be circling back to them. Please express our sincere thanks. It was very, very helpful and informative. And thank you to everyone on the commission here for your comments and questions. I found it very personally helpful, and I'm reasonably knowledgeable on some aspects of this stuff. So I found it very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thank you for everything that you continue to do, Steve. And echo those comments on the panel tonight. This is what, as I told you earlier today, this is the stuff I was looking forward to, and I really do appreciate you putting it together. I think it's helping us a lot to mature our thoughts and get us further down the process. So does any other commissioner want to be heard before we entertain a motion to adjourn? All right, then.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right. And that was moved and seconded by Pam. Or Chris.
Whatever.
Good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye.